The wind moaned low across the prairie as the sun dipped below the jagged hills, bathing the land in burnt orange and purple. It was the kind of evening Sarah Whitlock both loved and feared. The light was beautiful, but the dark that followed was wild, unpredictable, and often cruel. Her boots crunched on dry grass as she made her evening round near the well, a rusted rifle slung over one shoulder. The air smelled of sage and dust, the way it always did after another dry summer day. She was just about to turn back to the cabin when something caught her eye a shape in the dirt, unmoving. Her first thought was coyote or deer, maybe collapsed from the heat, but as she crept closer, her stomach twisted. It was a man, half covered in dust, his shirt soaked with blood, and his skin the deep bronze of the southern plains. His long black hair was matted with sweat, and a jagged wound on his side still oozed red into the earth. Even from a distance, Sarah knew. He was Comanche. Panic clawed at her throat. Battalions she'd grown up with screamed warnings in her mind. Comanche raids, burned wagons, kidnapped settlers. Her husband, Thomas, had died just 2 years ago during a skirmish on the Llano Estacado. He and 3 other men ambushed by warriors during a cattle drive. And yet, this man wasn't a threat now. He was dying. Sarah knelt slowly, her heart hammering as she looked over him. His chest rose and fell barely. His hands, though calloused and strong, trembled slightly in the dust. No weapons were in sight. She could leave him. Walk away. Let nature take its course. The law wouldn't punish her. Hell, the townsfolk would probably thank her. But something deep in her chest ached as she stared at him. He wasn't much older than she was, maybe 30, and there was something in his face, even in unconsciousness, that reminded her of loss. No one deserves to die alone, she muttered. It took all her strength to drag him back to the cabin. Each step a brutal test. The man moaned once but didn't wake. She propped him on a bedroll in the corner and worked by lantern light, tearing up one of Thomas's old shirts to stop the bleeding. She boiled water, used what whiskey she had to clean the wound, and stitched the gash with trembling fingers. Each time he flinched or whispered something in a language she didn't know, she paused. "You're safe," she whispered, though she wasn't sure if she was trying to reassure him or herself. She stayed up most of the night tending to him, dabbing his forehead with a cloth, forcing water between his lips. She should have felt afraid. She should have kept her rifle at arm's reach. But as the hours passed, fear gave way to duty, perhaps even compassion. The sky turned pale blue through the windows when he stirred for the first time. His eyes blinked, open, dark and sharp despite the fever. He sat up too quickly, wincing and grabbing his side. "Easy," Sarah said, lifting a hand. "You're hurt." His eyes darted to the room's corners, scanning for exits. His breathing grew ragged. She could almost see the fight return to his limbs, as if his body remembered who he was even if his mind hadn't caught up yet. "You're safe," she said again, stepping back. "I'm not going to hurt you." He didn't answer, just watched her like a trapped animal, quiet, wary, calculating. She moved slowly, offering him a cup of water. He took it with hesitation, drank, then set it down. A long silence passed between them. He said something in Comanche low, rough, and she shook her head. "I don't understand you." Still no response. Just those intense eyes fixed on her, filled with fire and something close to confusion. Maybe even disbelief. Sarah sat down at the table across the room, her rifle leaning against the wall within reach. She didn't take her eyes off him. In that moment, a fragile sort of truce was forged between them, unspoken but real. By morning, the weight of what she had done began to sink in. She had given aid to an enemy of the territory. If anyone found out, a passing ranch hand, a supply wagon, or worst of all, a posse, she could be arrested, even hanged for harboring him. But Sarah wasn't thinking about politics or laws. as she made a thin broth and coaxed him into sipping it spoonful by spoonful. She was thinking about the scar under his eye, about the beads braided into his hair, about how his hands trembled, less now than they had the night before. There was something deeply human beneath the war paint and the stories she'd been told. And for the first time in her life, she questioned everything she'd ever been taught about the Comanche. As the sun climbed higher, Sarah stepped outside to fetch more water from the well and froze. Dust rose on the horizon. Hoofbeats, riders. 5 men, rifles slung over their shoulders, heading straight for her cabin. A posse. Her heart thundered as she turned back toward the door. The wounded man inside was still too weak to run. If they found him, they'd kill him on sight. She had a choice to make. The wind kicked up a cloud of dust as the riders approached fast. 5 men in wide-brimmed hats, dusters flapping, rifles strapped to their saddles. Sarah's hands trembled. As she yanked open the door and ducked inside her cabin, the Comanche was awake now, sitting up against the far wall, eyes narrowing as he read her panic. "Men coming," she said, pointing toward the window. 5, with guns. He said nothing, but moved to stand, staggering with pain. He reached for a knife that wasn't there, but his weapons were long gone. He looked to her, waiting. Sarah hesitated. Her heart thudded in her ears. She didn't know this man anything. Saving him had been a moment of mercy, nothing more. But now she was at a crossroads. If the posse found him here, they'd shoot first and not ask a damn thing. And if they found out she'd helped him, she'd be branded a traitor to her own people. But she'd seen the life in his eyes. She'd seen the boy beneath the warrior. And she'd buried a husband whose death never made sense, killed in a conflict with people no one ever tried to understand. She met his gaze. "Get under the floorboards, now." His brow furrowed, but she pointed to the trapdoor near the hearth. "Hide. Quiet." He moved stiffly, lifting the creaky hatch and lowering himself into the crawl space. She closed it and dragged the worn bear rug over the top. Hard hammering. Then came the knock. She opened the door with her best poker face, wiping her palms on her apron. "Afternoon." "Ma'am," said the lead rider, a broad man with a silver star pinned to his vest. "Name's Sheriff Kemp. Sorry to barge in on you unannounced." "What's the matter, Sheriff?" she asked, voice even. "We're tracking a savage Comanche warrior. Ambushed a wagon near Burnett Creek yesterday morning. 3 men dead. Took a bullet himself but got away. We followed the blood trail out this way. Seen anything?" Sarah feigned confusion, shaking her head. "No, sir. I've been alone out here. Ain't seen anyone but coyotes." The men behind the sheriff scanned her property eyes on the woods. "The barn, the water barrel." Kemp tipped his hat back and sighed. "You sure? Trail ends not far from here. We figure he's hurt bad, might have crawled off somewhere." Sarah folded her arms. "I haven't seen anything. I've got nothing worth stealing, and I ain't foolish enough to offer shelter to a killer." Kemp nodded, eyes narrowing as he studied her. "Mind if we take a quick look around?" "Just 2. "Be sure?" Her heart stopped, but she forced a smile. "You won't find anything." For the next 20 minutes, the men combed through her barn and shed. One of them walked past the well where she'd found the warrior and paused for a moment, kicking at the dirt. Another walked the perimeter of the cabin, peering through windows. Sarah stood on the porch, arms crossed, praying silently. She kept. Her rifle leaned against the wall in plain view, hoping it made her look like less of a threat and more like someone not to mess with. Inside, the man under her floor didn't make a sound. Finally, Sheriff Kemp emerged from the barn, dusting off his hands. "Sorry to bother you, missus." "Whitlock," she said. "Sarah Whitlock." Kemp nodded slowly. "You're a brave woman, living out here alone." "I manage." "Well, if you do happen to see anything or anyone come find me in Blanco." "If he's out here, he won't." last long. Buzzards will find him sooner or later. He tipped his hat and turned back to his horse. Sarah stood there until all 5 men had ridden off, their dust trail disappearing into the golden hills. Only then did she let her knees buckle. She dropped to the floor and yanked the trapdoor open. The warriors stared up at her in silence. "You stay quiet like that again, you just might live," she said, breathing hard. Later that evening, the air felt different, tense, still. Sarah lit a single lamp, not wanting to draw attention, and sat across from the man at the small wooden table. He'd crawled out from beneath the floor an hour earlier and now sipped slowly from a tin cup. "I lied for you," she said quietly. "They're not done looking." He didn't respond, but his expression shifted something between guilt and gratitude. He nodded once, then placed his hand to his chest. "Takatu," he said. She frowned. "Your name?" He nodded. She pointed at herself. "Sarah," he repeated it slowly. "Sarah." Something passed between them then, fragile, like a strand of thread catching the breeze. Not trust. Not yet. But a beginning. Sarah stood, wiped her hands, and walked to the door. She locked it. Then she turned back to him. "If you stay here," she said softly, "you follow my rules. You speak when I speak. You hide when I say hide. You don't bring the war into my house." Takatu's dark eyes met hers. He nodded again. Outside, the coyotes howled into the night, and the prairie wind carried stories far older than either of them. Somewhere out there, death still hunted him. And now, maybe, it hunted her too. But inside that cabin, the fire burned low, and 2 people who should have been enemies shared silence and warmth in a world that wanted them both gone. The 3rd day dawned gray and quiet, with clouds hanging low over the Texas plains like a wool blanket ready to smother the sun. Sarah awoke to the soft clinking of tin. She reached for her rifle out of habit, then paused. Takatu, her wounded Comanche guest, was seated at the table, attempting to pour water from a kettle into a dented tin cup. His movements were slow but steady. The fever had broken overnight. His color had returned. The worst, it seemed, was over. Still, the tension in the air hadn't lifted. He noticed her watching and nodded slightly. A silent greeting. She nodded back. Sarah walked to the hearth and stirred the embers, adding a few sticks of mesquite. The fire crackled to life. "You're lucky you didn't die," she said absently. Takatu didn't answer. He looked at her closely, the way one might study a distant campfire carefully, not sure if it offered warmth or danger. His eyes, dark and bright like polished obsidian, never blinked. They unsettled her at first. Now they intrigued her. Sat across from him. "Why were you out there, Takatu?" No response. "Were you really part of that raid?" she pressed. "The one the posse's after?" His gaze dropped to the scar on her hand. His jaw tightened. Then, quietly, he said, "Fight came ... not from us." She leaned forward. "You speak English?" He nodded slowly. "Little. Learned from ... missionary man, many winters ago." She exhaled, surprised and suddenly hopeful. "Then maybe we can talk." Takatu sipped the water, then set the cup down and met her eyes again. "White men come, take cattle, burn trail, shoot deer. On our land." Sarah frowned. "You mean they crossed Comanche territory?" He nodded. "We asked to stop. They laugh. Shoot, boy. Only 15 summers." His words were broken but clear. "Enough. It wasn't a raid. It was revenge." Sarah leaned back in her chair, the creak of the wood loud in the silence. "They told everyone you attacked without reason. Ambushed settlers. Left 3 men dead." "Not truth," Takatu said. "Your men kill first. We only take back what is ours." She believed him, and that scared her. Everything she had been taught, everything she thought she knew, was beginning to crumble. The world was not as black and white as her father's sermons or the settler town's gossip made it seem. She looked at Tekatu, this man with a warrior's scars and a survivor's eyes, and realized she was no longer sure who the savages really were. Later that day, Sarah took Takatu outside for the first time, guiding him to the bench behind the cabin, where Thomas used to sit and smoke his pipe. The prairie wind swept across the land, stirring the golden grass into ripples. Takatu sat stiffly, but he seemed calmer in the open air. His eyes scanned the horizon constantly, always alert. "I buried my husband 2 years ago," she said suddenly. "He died during a drive near the Llano." Takatu looked over, his brow furrowed. "They said Comanche warriors attacked the herd," she continued, voice low. "He was shot through the chest, burned in the wagon fire." Takatu was silent for a moment. Then he said, "Many men die. War has no eyes, only fire." Sarah turned to him. "Is that why your eyes burn like that? Always watching?" He gave a faint, almost bitter smile. "I see much, too much." Sarah tilted her head. "You have eyes like fire, but not hate." He nodded once, acknowledging the words like a weight he carried every day. That night, she shared cornbread and beans with him. Their silence was less uncomfortable now, like a river slowly cutting through stone. They didn't have a common language for everything, but they understood enough. Takatu helped her stack firewood, even though he winced with every movement. She caught him watching the stars as she locked the doors. "You miss your people?" she asked gently. He looked up at the sky. "They look for me." She tensed. "They're coming?" A pause. "Soon." Her heart dropped into her stomach. She rose from the chair and went to the window, staring out into the darkness. "If they find you here, what will they do to me?" Takatu didn't answer. She turned back. "Will they see me as a friend or an enemy?" He stood, slowly, painfully. "You save warrior. That is sacred." Sarah met his eyes, and again that burning gaze locked onto her like a storm held behind silence. "I saved a man," she whispered. Takatu looked down. "Then you must pray." "They see same thing." As the fire crackled low and the sounds of night took over the prairie, Sarah lay awake in bed, listening to every creak and howl beyond the cabin walls. She had taken in a wounded man out of compassion. Now that man's tribe could come any day, any hour, and decide her fate. Yet strangely, she didn't regret it. In Takatu, she saw something rare. A fire not of destruction, but survival. And in herself, she saw the faint flicker of who she used to be before grief, before fear. The world made enemies out of strangers. By the fourth day, the prairie had gone strangely still. The cicadas were quiet. The birds no longer sang before dawn. Even the wind seemed to creep instead of rush. Sarah knew these signs of something watching, something coming. She fed the chickens, chopped kindling, and swept the porch like normal, but her every movement was sharp, practiced. A rifle leaned near every doorway now. The trapdoor stayed clear, always ready for use. Yet Takatu, wounded still, though stronger each day, refused to hide anymore. "I will not be in ground again," he said plainly when she suggested he stay beneath the floorboards. "If they come, I meet them as man." Sarah didn't argue. Not this time. That afternoon, she found him sitting on the edge of the corral, watching her fix a broken fence post. The sun made his skin gleam bronze, and though he still moved stiffly, there was a kind of strength returning to him, like a flame regathering beneath the ash. "You were trained for war," she said, wiping sweat from her brow. "I was born to it," he replied, "but I do not live only to kill." That surprised her. "Most people around here think you do," she said. "They think all Comanche want blood." He turned his head, those dark eyes narrowing. "You think that?" "I did," she admitted. A pause passed between them. "But now?" he asked quietly. She looked at him. Now I don't know what to think. That evening, as the sun dipped low, casting golden light across the long grasses, Sarah and Takatu stood together near the fence line. She'd brought out a telescope, an old thing Thomas used when watching for storms or coyotes. Now, she scanned the distant hills not for weather, but for riders. What would your people do if they saw you with me? She asked, still peering. Through the lens. Some would kill, he said plainly. Others would listen. My cousin, Red Hawk, he leads now. He listens. Is he your chief? He shook his head. No chiefs. We follow strongest voice in storm. Sarah smiled faintly. At the phrasing. And yours? Mine is quiet, he said, placing a hand to his chest. But strong. They returned to the cabin just as twilight deepened into indigo. Sarah lit the lantern. Takatu sat by the fire, carving something with her husband's old whittling. Knife his hands deft and graceful. She watched him silently for a while before asking, Why were you really out there alone? He stopped carving. The fire crackled. I was scout. Sent to track cattle stolen by white traders. Found their trail. But they saw me first. His eyes went cold, then flashes of memory behind them. I was shot, hunted like wolf. I ran until sky bled. Then ... I fell near your well. And you thought I'd kill you? He nodded. Or leave me. Why didn't I? She asked, almost to herself. Takatu looked up. Because you are not made of stone. That night Sarah lay awake. Again, half listening to the creaks in the wood, the coyote howls far off, the strange silence of the land. The fear wasn't gone, it had simply changed shape. She had always feared being alone out here. Now, she feared what might happen if someone came. If it was Takatu's people, would they thank her? Would they spare her? If it was the sheriff's posse, would they hang her? Burn her home? She turned over in bed, staring up at the beams above. She was caught between two world settlers who feared what they didn't understand, and a man whose life she had saved, but whose people might still see her as the enemy. But then she remembered what Takatu had said earlier. You are not made of stone. Maybe that's why she had done it, not because she was brave, not because she believed in anything bigger than herself, but because in that moment she'd seen a human being bleeding in the dirt and she couldn't walk away. Just before dawn. Sarah was jolted awake, not by noise, but by the absence of it. The prairie was utterly still. Even the wind refused to move, then faint hoofbeats. She threw the blanket off, grabbed her rifle, and moved to the window. Shadows danced in the moonlight on the ridge beyond the trees. She counted 3, then 5. Then more. Shapes on horseback. They weren't white men. They were Comanche. She turned from the window, heart pounding. Takatu was already awake, crouched beside the hearth, his knife in hand. He met her gaze calmly, as if he'd known this moment would come. They found me, he said simply. She swallowed hard. What do we do? He stood. I go out, speak with them, alone. You think they'll listen? He hesitated. They must. Sarah grabbed his arm. And if they don't? He looked at her for a long moment. Then it is the fire's choice. And with that, he walked to the door. Outside, the riders slowly descended the ridge. A dozen or more. Faces painted. Weapons at the ready. Their leader broad-shouldered, wearing feathers and his braid sat tall in the saddle. Sarah stood in the doorway, watching as Takatu stepped forward wounded, unarmed, proud. He raised one hand in greeting, then began speaking in Comanche, his voice low, measured, firm. The riders surrounded the cabin in a wide circle. The leader rode forward. Takatu spoke again, gesturing to the cabin. The leader's eyes shifted to Sarah, cold, curious. Judging. Then, he dismounted. Sarah gripped her rifle tighter. but did not raise it. The shadows had arrived. Now came the reckoning. Warriors dismounted one by one, their presence like a storm cloud settling over the prairie. Painted faces glistened in the moonlight, their gazes hard and unreadable. They carried bows, rifles, and spears, each movement deliberate, cautious, alert. Sarah stood in the doorway of her cabin, clutching her rifle not out of threat, but out of instinct. Her knuckles were white on the wood. She knew she couldn't use it, not on them, not with Takatu outside alone. Still, having it in her hands made her feel less helpless. Takatu stood tall, legs slightly apart for balance, hands open at his sides to show peace. His voice was calm, though she couldn't understand the words. He was speaking in Comanche, addressing the man with feathers braided into his hair, the leader. That had to be Red Hawk. The two exchanged words. Tension crackled like dry grass before a lightning strike. The other warriors remained silent, encircling the cabin like shadows. Then, Red Hawk pointed at her. Sarah's throat dried instantly. Takatu responded, firmly. His voice rose slightly, but there was no anger, only force. Conviction. He stepped between Sarah and the warriors, his body acting as a barrier. They said more sharp, clipped words that carried the weight of judgment. Sarah couldn't tell if they were deciding her fate, or Takatu's, or both. At last, Red Hawk raised one hand. The warriors froze. Takatu turned to Sarah. His face was grim. They demand to know why I stay here. With you. She swallowed. What? Do you want me to say? They think you are ... witch, trickster, or worse, spy. Sarah blinked, stunned. Because I helped you? Because you saved a dying warrior, Takatu replied. It is not ... normal. I didn't do it to confuse them. I did it because you were dying. Takatu nodded. They do not know that yet. Red Hawk stepped forward. He spoke directly to Sarah. His words were foreign, but his tone was not. It was challenging, demanding. Takatu translated slowly. He says, you must face judgment, not by white men, not by settlers. By our law. Her breath caught. Your law? Takatu looked away briefly, then back. They do not kill you. Yet, but you must come. You must stand before the elder. Sarah's heart pounded. You want me to go with them? They want truth. They want to look into your eyes. To decide what kind of woman saves a wounded Comanche. She glanced at the circle of silent, watchful warriors. And if they decide wrong? Takatu didn't answer, but his eyes, those dark, fire-lit eyes, held something she didn't expect. Fear. 20 minutes later, Sarah packed a small satchel, dried meat, bread, a knife. She wrapped a shawl around her shoulders and tried to steady her breath. Takatu waited by the horses. One was saddled for her, an unfamiliar brown Mustang with gentle eyes. It wore no reins, only a blanket. The warriors stood aside, still silent, still watching. Not one of them had spoken directly to her. Not even a nod. As she mounted the horse, her knees shaking, she looked at her cabin one last time. The place she had built with Thomas. The home she had kept through storms, through grief, through 2 long years of isolation. Now she was leaving it to ride with the very people her neighbors called the enemy. She looked at Takatu. You sure this is the only way? His voice was quiet. It is the only path where you may live. She gave a bitter chuckle, comforting. But she followed. They rode out under a blanket of stars. The moon cast silver light across the plains. The only sound was the steady rhythm of hooves and the occasional cry of a night bird. No one spoke. Takatu rode beside her. Red Hawk just ahead. The other warriors flanked them, forming a silent procession through the dark. Hours passed. They rode deep into unfamiliar land. The air grew cooler. Hills rolled into broken rock and winding trails. Eventually, Just as the horizon began to pale with the coming dawn, they crested a rise and Sarah saw it, a wide open valley ringed with buttes and cedar trees. Tents and lodges dotted the landscape, smoke curling gently from a dozen fires. The Comanche camp. Dozens of people stirred, some stepping from tents to watch the riders descend. Children peeked out from behind mothers. Dogs barked once, then went silent. The arrival of the warriors and the white woman among them did not go unnoticed. Sarah felt every eye on her. She had never felt so out of place, or so exposed. They rode into the center of camp and stopped. Red Hawk dismounted and gestured to her. She followed, stiff-legged, her nerves stretched to breaking. Takatu placed a hand on her shoulder. "You must be still," he said. "Do not show fear. Do not show anger. Only truth." "I don't even know your laws," she whispered. "You know your heart," he replied. "That is enough." The elder's lodge was large and round, covered in thick hides and decorated with painted symbols. Sarah stepped inside and immediately smelled smoke, herbs, and something earthy older than any church or courtroom she'd ever known. An old man sat by a low fire, his face lined with more years than she could count. His eyes were pale and clouded, but sharp all the same. Two women stood beside him, one young, one ancient, both draped in doeskin and beads. Takatu knelt. Sarah hesitated, then copied him. Red Hawk spoke first, offering a long string of words. Then the elder spoke softly, slowly, with great weight. Takatu looked at Sarah. "He asks, why you saved me." She took a breath. "Because you were dying, and no one should die alone in the dirt." Takatu translated. The elder tilted his head, considering. "He asked something else." Takatu nodded, then turned to her. "He asks what you fear now." Sarah looked into the old man's eyes. "I fear I did the right thing and still won't survive it." Takatu translated again. Silence followed. Then the elder did something unexpected. He laughed, a soft, low chuckle, dry as a leaf but warm somehow. He spoke once more. Takatu turned to Sarah. "He says, we will see what kind of woman you really are." The morning sun rose slowly over the Comanche camp, casting warm light on faces once painted for war. The sharp chill of the night faded, but Sarah Whitlock felt no warmth. She stood alone outside the elder's lodge, her boots dusty, her palms damp with sweat. Around her, the camp stirred to life. Women stoked fires, children laughed in the distance, and horses whinnied softly as they were led to water. But none of the daily rhythms softened the knot in her stomach. Takatu emerged from a nearby tent, now dressed in fresh leathers, his wound carefully wrapped. He walked with more strength, still healing, but no longer fragile. "They are ready," he said quietly. Sarah turned toward him. "For what?" He hesitated. "To judge." The center of camp had been cleared. A wide circle of packed earth was surrounded by warriors, elders, mothers, and even small children, all standing silently. In the center sat the council of three, the blind elder she had met, a younger man with a long braid and hawk feathers, and a woman with deeply lined eyes and a stern mouth. Red Hawk stood to the side. Takatu stood beside her, but Sarah stepped forward alone. She was the only white person in that circle. The old man raised a hand, and a hush fell over the camp. He spoke in Comanche. His voice was slow, ceremonial, but it carried power, centuries of it. His words flowed like river stones, shaped and worn smooth by time. Takatu translated in a low voice beside her. "He says, this circle is sacred. It has seen truth and lies, peace and war, life and death. He asks that you speak only what is real." Sarah nodded once. "I understand." The woman on the council spoke next, her voice sharper, more skeptical. Her expression held none of the old man's curiosity. She Asks why you saved a warrior the whites call enemy. Takatu translated. Sarah took a deep breath. Because I saw a man, not an enemy. He was hurt, left to die. I couldn't walk away. The younger male council member asked a series of quick, harsh questions. Takatu frowned slightly. He wants to know if you ever killed Comanche. If your husband was part of the men who burned our trails. If you came here to spy. Sarah met the man's eyes. My husband died in a cattle drive attack 2 years ago. I don't know who killed him. I never fought any Comanche. I don't hate you. I don't spy. I just wanted to do what was right. The man's gaze was cold, but he said nothing more. Then the elder raised a hand again. He spoke a long sentence calm, but weighty. Takatu whispered, he says truth must be proven, not just spoken. Sarah's heart dropped. How? Takatu pointed toward a young woman stepping into the circle, carrying 2 bowls, one wooden, one made of buffalo horn. She placed them in front of the council. The woman with the stern mouth spoke. Takatu translated, you will drink from one. One holds bitter root, it brings sickness and vision. The other, only water. If you lie, the root will find you. Sarah's breath caught. Poison? Takatu shook his head. Not poison, not death. But your body will reject lies. The sickness is truth's weapon. Sarah stared at the bowls. 2 indistinguishable cups, one test. No way to fake it. This wasn't about facts, it was about spirit. About honesty. She stepped forward, looked at the bowls, and chose the one. Made of horn, she didn't hesitate. She didn't try to reason it out. She lifted the bowl, whispered a prayer under her breath, and drank. The taste was bitter but not unbearable. Earthy, cold, with a faint metallic sting. Sarah wiped her lips, then returned the bowl to the ground. The circle remained utterly silent. A minute passed, then another. A warm flush crept up her neck, but she remained still. Her stomach churned slightly, but nothing more. No retching, no dizziness, no vision or fever. The elder smiled. He nodded once and said something that Takatu didn't need to translate. Everyone had seen. Sarah Whitlock had spoken the truth. A slow murmur rippled through the gathered crowd. Some nodded, some didn't move at all. The council stood. The woman still looked skeptical, but the young man gave the slightest respectful bow. The elder stepped forward, spoke briefly, then reached into a pouch on his belt and pulled out a strip of leather, braided and knotted at both ends. He handed it to Takatu, who held it out to her. What is it? She asked. A bond, he said, a symbol. You are no longer outsider. You are under protection of the Comanche. Sarah stared at him. Just like that? Takatu looked at her seriously. Not just like that. You risked your life. You passed the trial. You are no longer a stranger. That evening, a feast was prepared. A fire was built in the center of the camp. Meat roasted on spits. Dancers moved to drumbeats. Children laughed again. Sarah sat near the fire, watching the celebration with awe and disbelief. Women who had once stared at her now offered her water, food, a place to sit. No one touched her, but they included her. Slowly, respectfully, Takatu sat beside her. You're one of them again, she said quietly. He nodded. Thanks to you. I'm not sure I belong here, she admitted. He looked at her. And yet, here you are. She smiled faintly. And now? His eyes flickered with firelight. Now we wait. The Comanche have accepted you. And the settlers? She asked. The posse? He turned toward the shadows just beyond the fire. They may come. But this time, they won't find a woman. Alone. The days that followed were unlike anything Sarah Whitlock had ever known. She awoke each morning to the scent of cedar, smoke, and the soft murmurs of women preparing morning meals. Children dashed barefoot between lodges, chasing dogs and laughter. The men rode out at dawn, returning with rabbits, deer, or stories. No church bells, no gunshots, no news of the world beyond the hills. Only rhythm, fire, earth, sky. She was not Comanche, not truly. But they let her be near, and for the first time since Thomas had died, she no longer felt like a ghost wandering through someone else's life. Takatu had become something else entirely. Not the wounded, fevered man she'd pulled from the dirt butt. A full warrior again. His posture was proud. His voice was strong when he spoke with the elders. His people had accepted him back without question, but they watched him carefully. The story of his survival and her role in it had changed him in their eyes. And her, she could feel it in the way. They looked at her, not with fear anymore, not with suspicion, with curiosity, and from some respect. One woman, tall, broad-shouldered, with a soft voice, began teaching Sarah how to grind corn on a flat stone. Another showed her how to weave strands of grass into thin cords. The children laughed when she stumbled through her first Comanche words and clapped when she managed a sentence without error. It wasn't easy. Some still ignored her completely. Others wouldn't sit near her at the fire. But no one tried to drive her away. In their way, they were watching to see if she meant what she said during the test of truth. Each moment she stayed, she was proving it. One afternoon, Sarah helped a young boy wrap his foot, which had been cut on sharp rock. She tied it tightly with cloth from her bag. His mother looked on silently, then finally nodded and said, "Tika, thank you." Sarah guessed. The woman gave the faintest smile. Progress. That night, as the stars appeared over the valley, Sarah sat beside Takatu on a small rise just beyond the outer ring of tents. They could see the entire camp from their fires like glowing beads in the dark, the hum of distant drums echoing across the hills. "You look at them like you're one of them," Takatu said. She didn't look away. "I don't know what I am anymore." He was quiet for a moment. Then he said, "There are many kinds of warriors. Some fight with knives. Others with hands that heal." Sarah glanced at him. "You think I'm a warrior?" He nodded. "Only warriors do what you did. Only warriors face fear and stand anyway." She smiled a little, brushing her hair behind her ear. "I didn't do it to be brave. I did it because I was tired of watching good people suffer." "You were alone," he said. "But you still chose the hard path." "That's the only path I've ever known." They sat in silence a while longer. Then Sarah asked, "Will I ever really belong here?" Takatu didn't answer immediately. Finally, he said, "Some people are born into a people. Others earn their way in. You walk among them now. That is more than most ever do." The following morning, Sarah woke to commotion. Men shouting, horses pawing the ground. She threw on her shawl and rushed outside. At the far edge of the camp, 2 scouts had returned, dust-covered, tense. Takatu was already there, speaking with Red Hawk. She caught only fragments of the Comanche words, but one phrase was repeated: "White riders." Takatu turned to her. "They come." Sarah's blood ran cold. "The posse?" He nodded. 6 men. Coming fast, rifles ready. She looked at Red Hawk. "Will they fight?" "Not yet." Takatu said, "They sent a scout first." "A scout?" She didn't have to ask who, because moments later a single rider emerged from the trail. Sheriff Kemp. He didn't come armed. His rifle remained on his saddle, his hands open, but his eyes were hard. He stopped 20 feet from the camp entrance and dismounted slowly. Red Hawk and 2 warriors walked forward. Sarah stepped up beside them. Ignoring Takatu's warning glance, Kemp spotted her instantly. "Well," he said, "look what the wind dragged into Comanche country." She said nothing. He looked around, eyes sharp. "Came to ask one thing. That man you hid he in there?" Sarah crossed her arms. "You see him, don't you?" Camp sighed. "We lost a good man. His widow's begging for justice." Red Hawk stepped forward. He didn't understand English, but he understood tone, and Kemp's was hostile. Takatu translated for both sides. He says, "Your man fired first. The Takatu defended his own land." "That's not how our law sees it," Kemp replied. Sarah stepped between them. "Sheriff," she said, "you know me. You knew Thomas. Do you think I'd ride with Comanche unless there was more to the story?" Kemp didn't answer. He glanced at Red Hawk, then at Takatu, then at Sarah. "You're past the line now," he said quietly. "You're not one of U.S. anymore." She held his stare. "Maybe I never was." Kemp didn't threaten. He didn't raise a gun. He just mounted his horse and said, "Don't come back. They won't show mercy again." Then he rode off. The posse didn't return that night. But war no longer seemed far away. The morning after Sheriff Kemp's warning, a weight pressed heavy on the Comanche camp. Though no shots had been fired, no blood spilled, the silence itself was a kind of war awaiting breath that refused to exhale. Sarah knew the settlers wouldn't forget, and neither would the Comanche. They were two winds destined to clash, and she stood in the middle. Takatu found her near the river, kneeling by the water's edge, scrubbing cloth by hand. The cold made her fingers stiff, but she didn't stop. "You are troubled?" he said gently. She glanced at him. "I used to believe that peace was simple. Just stop the killing. But now I see. Peace costs more than war. And I don't know who's willing to pay it." Takatu nodded slowly. "Comanche do not trust words, but they trust fire." She frowned. "Fire?" He looked up toward the butte beyond the valley. "The fire eyes speak tonight." Sarah turned fully toward him. "What are fire eyes?" "A gathering, sacred. Warriors, elders, and women of council sit in firelight and speak truth. Every word is heard. Every heart is weighed. You are called." She froze. "Me? You saved a warrior. You passed the test of truth. But now, you must speak not only for yourself, but for what comes next." She looked at the earth. "I don't know what to say." Takatu crouched beside her. "Say what burns in your chest. That is what fire listens to." By nightfall, the valley glowed with torchlight. A great fire blazed in the center of a wide stone ring high on the ridge. All who had voice or reason to listen gathered. Sarah climbed the slope behind Takatu, wrapped in a thick wool shawl. She saw faces she now recognized. The old woman who taught her to grind corn. The boy whose foot she had bandaged. Red Hawk, expression unreadable. And at the center, seated nearest the flames, the three-member council, including the elder who had first judged her. The fire roared. Sparks danced into the sky. Then the elder raised one hand. "All who speak must face the flame," Takatu whispered. "And you must speak second." Sarah's pulse quickened. "Who speaks first?" "Red Hawk." The warrior leader stepped into the ring and addressed the fire, his voice firm but even. He spoke in Comanche, but Sarah understood enough to feel the weight of his words. Takatu translated quietly beside her. "He says the white world closes around us. Their law comes with iron. They call us savage for defending what they tried to take. But now, one of theirs comes to us with no weapon, no lies. And now, we must choose how to answer that." Then Red Hawk stepped back. Takatu turned to Sarah. "They call you now." Sarah stepped into the fire circle. The heat hit her first. Then the silence. All eyes were on her, Comanche eyes that had seen war, death, and the breaking of worlds. She drew a long breath and spoke. "I came from a place where people only saw the Comanche as enemies, as ghosts from the trees, shadows with arrows. I believed that too, until I found a man bleeding under my well. I saved him because I saw not a warrior but a man. A life," the fire crackled. You ask why I stay. I stay because I learned truth here, because I saw what my people never will if they never open their eyes. She looked directly at the elder council. I know the settlers will return, maybe with guns, maybe with fire, but I won't go back to them, not to lies, not to fear. I don't want to bring war. I want to help stop it. She took a final breath. If you'll have me? Then she stepped back. The silence was long. Then the old woman of the council stood. She stepped into the circle, walked slowly to Sarah, and held out her hand. Not to take, but to lift. Sarah reached out, uncertain until their hands touched. Then the woman nodded once and spoke. Takatu translated aloud. She says, you are not white. You are not Comanche. You are firewoman now. Between two winds. Gasps and murmurs rippled through the circle. It was not just a name. It was a place among them. Later that night, Sarah stood at the edge of the ridge, overlooking the valley. Takatu joined her, the fire still reflecting in his eyes. Firewoman, he said softly. She gave a crooked smile. Sounds a bit dramatic, doesn't it? It is not a title, he said. It is a warning and a promise. They stood quietly for a moment. Below them, drums pulsed. Laughter rose from the fires. But Sarah couldn't shake the feeling of the storm still waiting just over the next hill. They'll come, she said. Takatu nodded. Yes, and they will bring fire of their own. And what will we do? He looked out at the stars. We will stand in it. The wind shifted, dry and sour, carrying not just dust, but the scent of something foul and familiar. Smoke. Sarah stood outside her tent, her hand shielding her eyes as she gazed toward the southern ridge. The sun was still high, but the air was thick and heavy. Dogs barked nervously. Horses shifted in their corrals. Red Hawk was the first to move, then Takatu. Then every warrior with a horse. Sarah grabbed her rifle and followed Takatu through the low brush to the lookout point atop a sandstone outcrop. From there she saw it clearly. Smoke, dark, rising in thin pillars, maybe 2 miles off. Near the riverbed. They're burning something, she whispered. Takatu didn't blink. Scouting. You mean they're flushing you out? He nodded. They burn fields before they bring rifles. Sarah stared into the distance, anger rising like bile in her chest. How many? Takatu watched the horizon for a long moment before answering. Too many for words, not enough for fear. By dusk, a council was called, this time not by ceremony, but necessity. Red Hawk spoke fast and low. Warriors listened. Elders gave nods. Orders were not barked, but passed like torches from one man to the next, calm, controlled, efficient. Sarah approached Takatu as he wrapped leather around his wrists, his war paint drying against his cheekbones. You're going to meet them? She asked. Not yet. First we watch, then we decide. You think they'll attack? I think they will try to force choice. He paused, looked at her directly. And I think we have made ours already. She swallowed hard. Let me come. He blinked, surprised. To the ridge? I can ride. I can shoot. I've defended this land before. He studied her, the firelight dancing in his eyes again. You are Firewoman, he said softly. That name carries fire. At dawn, a scouting party rode out. Red Hawk, Takatu, 2 younger warriors, and Sarah. They rode low through the brush, eyes always on the trail. The smoke had faded, but its stain still clung to the air. Vultures circled above the dried riverbed. When they reached the old cattle path, Red Hawk raised his hand and stopped. He slid from his horse and knelt in the dirt. Boot prints. Fresh. Sarah dismounted, crouching beside him. How many? She whispered. More than a dozen, Takatu answered. Some on foot. Some stayed behind to light fire. And look, Red Hawk pointed ahead. A small broken wagon, abandoned and smoldering. Sarah moved toward it cautiously. Its wheels had been splintered on purpose. Inside was a crate empty, but marked with the seal of a ranch she recognized from town. "These aren't just lawmen," she said. "That ranch belongs to a man named Colonel Pike. He hires guns." "Not deputies." Takatu nodded grimly. "They bring mercenaries." She turned toward him. "They're not looking for justice anymore. They're looking for war." As the sun rose behind them, the party returned to camp. Red Hawk called a second council, this time with every warrior present. Even the women who could fight joined them. The camp was quiet, but not with fear. With resolve. Sarah stood among them, not as an outsider, not even just as firewoman, but as someone who had something to protect. That night, Takatu and Sarah sat beneath a cedar tree on the edge of the valley. The stars above seemed quieter than usual, dimmed by the haze of smoke still hanging to the south. He handed her a bow. She took it. No questions. Then he passed her a knife, his own, the one he had carved with when she first found him half dead beneath her well. She took it with trembling hands. "Are you giving me this?" "No," he said quietly. "I am returning it. It has been yours since the night you chose to fight for life instead of fear." She blinked hard, trying to push down the weight in her chest. "Takatu," he met her gaze. "You do not need to ride with warriors tomorrow. You've done more than most ever do." She shook her head. "I'm not letting you ride into a fire I helped light." He smiled faintly. "Then we ride together." By morning, the first riders were spotted across the ridge. 15, maybe 20. Most carried rifles. Some wore badges. Most didn't. Colonel Pike rode in the center, an old soldier turned cattle baron, now with war in his eyes and money in his saddlebag. The Comanche didn't meet them with arrows. Not yet. Instead, Red Hawk rode forward alone. Sarah watched from a bluff, her rifle resting across her lap, her heart beating with the rhythm of the earth. Words were exchanged. But even from this distance, she could see what the outcome would be. Colonel Pike pointed toward the camp. Red Hawk turned and rode back. Takatu spoke softly as the warriors gathered. "He gives us until sunset to turn over the white woman. He says we are harboring a fugitive. And if we do not, he will burn every tent to ash." Sarah stood, shoulders square, chin high. "So give me to him." But Takatu shook his head. So did Red Hawk, and one by one, the others. The boy whose foot she wrapped, the mother who gave her bread, even the elder. "You are firewoman," Red Hawk said firmly. "You are not property to be traded." And then he turned to the others. "Prepare." As the sun began to fall, the Comanche warriors painted their faces. Women packed children toward the mountain pass. Men sharpened blades and tied arrows in bundles, and Sarah stood in the center of it all, wrapping her hands in leather, gripping the rifle she once used to hunt deer, now pointed at those she once called neighbors. The fire was coming. She could smell it. But for the first time in her life, she didn't run from the smoke. She walked toward it. The sky burned red, not from fire yet, but from the setting sun slicing across the horizon like a final warning. Sarah stood on the ridge with Takatu at her side, both silhouetted against the flame-colored sky. Below them, the Comanche camp was quiet, prepared. Warriors stood in formation along the high ground. Arrows were stacked neatly. Women and children had been moved into the rocks beyond the canyon pass, shielded by elders. They had chosen to stay. They had chosen to fight, and she had chosen to stay with them. Across the valley, Colonel Pike's force assembled. Riders, rifles, pistols. Some wore makeshift uniforms, others rags and bandoliers. They were not lawmen. They were bounty hunters and killers driven by gold and fear. and at the center of it all sat Pike himself, tall in the saddle, his face hard with certainty. He hadn't come to arrest anyone. He had come to end something. Red Hawk gave the final order with a single nod. The Comanche spread out silent. Swift, precise. Sarah moved to her position on the eastern flank, just above a narrow rock chute. A natural bottleneck. If the riders came through here, they'd be forced to break formation. She dropped to one knee, steadied her rifle, and watched the trail. Takatu crouched beside her. "Remember what you see," he said softly. "Not just what you fear." Sarah nodded, heart pounding. "Do you think they'll stop?" "No," he said, "but they'll remember who stood in their way." The first shot cracked the still. Air like thunder. It didn't come from the Comanche. A rifleman on the other side had opened fire early. A mistake, premature, but it shattered any illusion of negotiation. In an instant, the riders charged. The Comanche didn't meet them head on. Instead, they moved like wind and smoke, striking from cover, then vanishing behind brush and boulders. Arrows flew like whispers, precise and punishing. A horse went down. Then a second. Pike's men tried to regroup, but the terrain worked against them. The narrow trail became a trap. That's when Sarah saw him, Pike, himself driving his horse straight through the bottleneck. She took a breath. Aimed. Fired. The shot hit his horse in the flank. It bucked, reared, and threw him hard into the dirt. Two riders broke rank to help, but a flurry of arrows pinned them back. Takatu loosed his bow without a word, hitting one man clean in the shoulder. The other fell back with a scream. Sarah climbed to a higher ridge, looking down at the chaos. Smoke now rose from one of the dry mesquite trees ignited by the first bullet. It caught fast, spread faster. The fire had come. Despite their numbers, the riders were disoriented. They weren't fighting a line, they were fighting ghosts. And when the fire hit the wind, it swept across the grass like a black wave, separating them further. By twilight, the attack began to collapse. The men started pulling back, not ordered, not clean, just running. A few dropped weapons as they rode off into the darkness. Colonel Pike was not among them. Sarah found him by the dry creek bed, his leg broken, his face scraped and bleeding, his revolver lost in the dust. He was trying to crawl. She stepped into his view. Rifle raised. He froze. "Well," he spat, "looks like you've gone full savage." She didn't answer. He tried to sit up, wincing. "You think they'll let you stay forever? They'll turn on you? Same as they did the rest. You think you're one of them?" "I don't have to be," she said quietly. "But I'll never be one of you again." He lunged. Too slow. Sarah stepped back and leveled her rifle again, but Takatu appeared behind her. He raised a hand, not to shoot, to stop her. She looked at him, confused, but then she understood. Pike wasn't worth it. They weren't here to become murderers. They were here to survive. To protect. To resist the fire, not feed it. They left him there. He would crawl back. He would tell his story, and the next time someone came hunting, they'd think twice. By dawn, the smoke had cleared. The valley still stood, not unscathed, but unbroken. The camp gathered quietly around the central fire. There were losses, but fewer than feared. The warriors returned with heads held high, their pride intact. And among them stood Sarah Whitlock, not as a guest, not as an outsider, but as someone who had helped hold the line, someone who had chosen truth and fire. The elder approached her, slowly. In his hand was a strip of deerskin painted now with red and black symbols. He placed it in her hands. "PFA," he said. "Fire that walks." Takatu translated with a small smile. "You are not only firewoman now." Sarah looked at him. "You are the fire that moves." She looked around at the faces, the valley, the smoldering edge of the ridge. She thought of Thomas. She thought of the day she dragged Takatu into her root cellar, not knowing she was saving her own soul as much as his, and she knew this was home now. Not just land, but people. Not just survival, but something worth fighting for, something that had already survived every fire thrown its way.